Hi. Several of you have asked about the speech that I gave today at the Soul Sisters. I don't know if it's called a retreat or a convention or what it's called, but it was just a day where 220 women packed into our church and shared some time of worship and praise and told stories about how God has transformed our lives. And this is my story. I don't think I'm going to share it publicly because there are some parts of it that might ruffle some feathers, and I don't think I'm brave enough to share it publicly, honestly. So, if you are seeing this, you are a special select few, and thanks for listening. So, I'll go ahead and get started. A brief introduction. My name is Danny Niesendirk, and I've attended Good Shepherd since 2014. I want to warn you that my story has the potential to hold a lot of stigma, so I encourage you to hear me out with an open mind and an open heart to experience the transformation God has provided in my life. I have many titles. I'm the mom to 3 beautiful, wonderful children. Journey 8, Jet 3, Indy 18 months. I'm a wife to a loving and devoted husband, Tommy, who's 32, in case you're curious. I'm an addict in recovery since 2010. I'm a suicide attempt survivor. I'm the face of homelessness in the Northland. I've been a thief. I've been abused and an abuser. But more important than any other title, I am the daughter of a loving and forgiving, very graceful God. The following is a timeline showing specific circumstances when God showed up, even when I didn't believe in his existence. Regardless, he refused to leave me behind, and for that I am forever grateful. When I was in my early teens, I noticed I had a problem with depression. I didn't know exactly how to ask for help at that point, but my parents knew me well enough to ask for me. When I was 19, I terminated a pregnancy. I was in the throes of active addiction and truly saw no other way out. If I was unable to care for myself, how could I care for a child? I ad-libbed at this point because I wanted people to understand that it wasn't the aftercare so much that I was worried about. It was staying clean through the pregnancy, because I knew that at this particular time in my life, I wouldn't be able to stay clean through a pregnancy. Anyway, I didn't know exactly how to ask for help at that point, but drugs and alcohol knew me well enough to take over completely. When I was 20, I overdosed on a prescription and alcohol in a suicide attempt. I didn't know exactly how to ask for help at that point, but my parents knew me well enough to ask for me. That was my first time institutionalized for addiction and depression. When I was 21, I realized I had developed a substantial drinking problem. I didn't know exactly how to ask for help at that point, but God knew me well enough to ask for me. This was my second time institutionalized for addiction and depression. When at 21, after a stint in the hospital to stay alive during alcohol withdrawal, they told me I needed an inpatient program for at least 28 days. I didn't know exactly how to ask for help at that point, but God knew me well enough to ask for me. This was my third and final time institutionalized for addiction and depression. During that one, it literally was like I just woke up one day and God was like, you have to get help. And all I did was I grabbed a basket that was full of dirty clothes, and I got in my car and I drove home from college and told my mom that I needed to go somewhere and I needed them to lock me up so that I would quit drinking, because I couldn't do it on my own. I would get shakes and I would black out, and I couldn't figure out what was going on with my body. And then I realized that I needed a medical detox. When I was 21, I got pregnant with my journey. I was in a toxic relationship with a person who continued using drugs. And if I wasn't pregnant, I have no doubt I would have traveled that road with him. I thought getting pregnant was an accident or a mistake. God makes no mistakes. He knew what he was doing. When I was 22, I relapsed. I thought that the love that I had for my child would be enough. It would be enough for me to be able to drink responsibly, for me to have a beer or two and then stop. But but I'm an addict, and I don't stop once I start, no matter how much I love my kid. By now, I'd learned to ask for help. I'd taken bits and pieces of tools along the way, and I knew that asking for help was my only solution. When I was 23, I found myself homeless, not living on the streets or under bridges or in shelters, but I stayed with my mom, and my income qualified me for transitional living for homelessness, which was Hillcrest Hope. I was terrified to ask for help, but if my situation was going to improve, I had to. I didn't have the courage, but God kept pushing. Signs were everywhere. Do this, Danny. Do this next right thing. When I was 25, I had my first identified manic episode, complete with auditory hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew I wasn't high, even though I clearly felt like I was. I didn't know exactly how to ask for help at that point, but God knew me well enough to ask for me. I called every psychiatrist in the books and luckily was placed with the perfect one to put a name and a medication with what I was experiencing. When I was 27, we found Good Shepherd after church shopping for several months. The message was about tithing, and though that's not what we wanted to hear in our introduction, we had the opportunity to witness a same-sex couple being welcomed as members of the church. I didn't know that was planned to happen that day, but God certainly did, and He knew that we needed to see a church display the unconditional love that we believe comes from an all-powerful and all-loving God. When I was 28, we joined a small group. I had no idea how important these people would become to me, but God knew. God knew we would need them and would continue to need them in the future. When I was 29, I had a miscarriage. I wanted to get high. Not for the physical pain of the procedure completed, I had a D&C, but for the emotional pain of losing a child that we had prayed for. I questioned whether God, instead of loving and caring, was vengeful and punishing me for the pregnancy termination of years ago. But I prayed anyway. I knew that wasn't truth. God was with me through it all, through all the heartache, and I didn't use, even though I wanted to. Instead, I asked for help. I knew the signs. I was depressed, and I needed help. When I was 29, I unexpectedly lost my best friend, my grandma, to COPD. I was pregnant with my third at the time, and if I wouldn't have been pregnant, I would have relapsed. By now, I'm a firm believer that God's timing is perfect. He knew what He was doing. Even though it hurt so badly and continues to hurt, He kept me clean with His timing. When I was 30, after my third child, my mania returned. Most often, people experience postpartum depression, and mine was what I thought was anxiety. But I asked for help. I went to my doctor and said, "These are my symptoms." And he said, "This is prolonged mania. You've gone weeks without eating or sleeping. Getting back on your medications will help." Still at 30, I began lying to my doctor, telling him that my mania was under control. Mania I can deal with. Depression is another story. I rode the proverbial mania roller coaster for months, and then the impulsivity kicked in. I started smoking after years of being a very proud non-smoker. I started stealing. I started lying about little things here and there until it all came crashing down. When the mania ends, the depression sinks in. And sometimes the mania and the depression meet each other like old friends and team up against me, which is where I'd been stuck for weeks. But I asked for help. I asked for help from my family. I asked for help from medical professionals. I asked for help from God, from my small group, from my sponsor, from my kids, and from my best friends. I've been honest about my struggles online because I get flooded with messages afterwards about how easily they can identify with my experience and how much easier it has made them to ask for help, which is how I was found to share my story with you today. Through all of this, I believe that the reckless love of God has led me to where I stand in this very moment. Much like the lost sheep, God sought me out, captured my heart, and gratefully has brought me into His loving grace. If you hear nothing else from what I've spoken, I want you to hear loud and clear. Asking for help is not an admission of defeat. It is a fight back. Don't let your mind fool you. You are strong. You are able. I and so many others are on your side. I am proof that God is there even when you don't believe He is. He is present and He is working hard on your behalf. The reckless love of God will never run dry. It is limitless. No matter how many times you fall or feel like you're falling or are about to fall, God will be there. He will provide, always, his overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it.